Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Stories That Inspire Us, the author series. My name is Janice Malillo, your host. Obviously, I love to read. I definitely am a book nerd, and I love, all these amazing books. And of course, I have an amazing guest on today. But let me tell you, each one of these, especially today's guest, really is written from the heart, from their experience. With their lives. So without further ado, welcome to the Stories That Inspire Us podcast, the author series, the amazing Doreen Padilla. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Janice.
Oh, you are so welcome. So, excuse me, Doreen, you are a speaker and an author, and you published your own book,
Yes.
and it's called Outsiders, A Journey to Belonging. And I thought this was a very interesting book. And as I mentioned before we went live, before I hit the record button, I was live on the Wisdom audio app. And by the way, welcome to everyone on Wisdom who's currently hopping on. Excuse me. I asked you a very specific question. And I'm so glad that I had asked it before we went to recording. And as I said, to everyone who was on Wisdom, if you want to know what the question is, you have to ask Doreen. But I'm not sure she'll tell you the answer because you have to read the book. It really was a very heartfelt story, and I felt a connection to your story, from so many different perspectives. Sometimes it's always hard to ask the first question, which I technically already did, but really from the heart, what made you want to write this story about it's so many different stories wrapped in one?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a great question. It's funny because I think writing, we all, not everyone, right? But a lot of people find it as like a very therapeutic thing, whether it's journaling or telling stories or things like that. But a few years ago, I started finding myself in these situations where I was either hearing speakers or I was at conferences and people are saying, the importance of telling your story. And I thought about some of my favorite speakers that I've seen. I used to do a lot of professional development, and I always connected with the ones that told their story. And so I thought about how powerful storytelling can really be. And so I always thought, I want to write a book one day, but I didn't know what that was going to look like. And I'd have times where I'd blog or I'd do things that I felt were like my creative outlet, but I never really felt like I knew where I wanted to take that. And then what I really felt compelled to do was my husband. So my book, it's a memoir. Technically, I guess it's a story a little bit about me, but it also includes my husband and his story. And what I realized is that what great privilege I had to be able to tell his story. And he didn't have that privilege, and he is also shy anyways, but he was never going to tell his own story. But I was so inspired by his story. And every time I would tell people it, just, in conversation, they would be so moved by it and surprised by it. And so I felt like this was really a calling for me, was that he trusted me and that I had the privilege to do it. And so I think that, the book title Outsiders, I think a lot of people can really relate to feeling like an outsider, whether it's in your own family, whether it's in school, or whether, it's in different environments. And so for me, I felt like it was a story worth telling because people may not be able to, it doesn't resonate with everyone in a very, in certain specific ways, but I think the just feeling of being an outsider does resonate with everyone.
Oh my gosh, you are so correct. And I love how you describe that because I am always chatting about the importance of telling your story, but more importantly, the significance of it, because what that can do to inspire others, maybe through adversity, maybe through different things that somebody else may be going through. And as you mentioned, when you went to different speaking events, you always connected with the speakers that shared their stories.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Like, go back to one of those speaking engagements. where you're sitting there in the audience and you're kind of taking everything in and you're listening to that speaker. You're not just hearing them, you're really connecting and listening to their story. What is one story for you that sticks out that you took something away from their story?
Yes, there's one that stands out significantly, and it was a gentleman that talked about he was neurodiverse, and so growing up, he never quite fit in school, and he was kind of quirky and did things his own way, and was always kind of told. This was the funny part. I remember him saying people called him a chatterbox, and he was always in trouble for talking too much, which was always my fault too. That was my problem too, and he talked about how as a child, he was often kind of shamed for that, right? Like you need to learn when your time is to be quiet and not, talk so much, and people don't want to hear you all the time. But he talked about the power in using what maybe people see as maybe your biggest weakness, but is your biggest strength. And so he talked about, hey, the joke's on them, because guess what? I get to do speaking engagements for a living now. And so it was really interesting because he really shared the experience of kind of being maybe being made fun of or given a hard time about something that, personality trait of his. And that actually, in the end, it ended when he learned to embrace it and stop working against it, that it actually turned out to be exactly where he needed to be. And he was like, people like to hear me talk. They think I'm funny. And so once he learned to say, that's actually not a bad thing, that's actually a good thing. And so I can't remember the name now, but he wrote a book, and he had an adult book and a children's book, but it was all about embracing, what makes you different and actually using that to your advantage in your career and growing up. And so what was really cool is he had a children's book version of it, and he had an adult book, or I guess adult, geared towards adults. And I bought both because I got one for my daughter to say it's okay to be different and it's okay to really embrace that. And then I bought my dad it because my dad's always loves like any type of professional development opportunity, things like that. But it stood out to me, and I will never forget him saying, once you learn to use the things that maybe people use against you for yourself, and you can actually use it as a strength. And so that was probably a decade ago, and it still stands out to me now.
You know, I just want to say, first of all, because I have to go back to this, you mentioned that he was a chatterbox, and certainly you were. And I just want to say that I am not, which is kind of ironic. Here I am, the host of 3 podcasts, one, of course, which I co-host with my sister. My older siblings, definitely all the chatterbox. But that is so true. Something that he grew up with, knowing that, he is this chatterbox,
Mm-hmm.
but now he's using it to his advantage, and he inspired you. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously he
Exactly.
inspired others. Like, to me, that is so amazing, creating that ripple effect.
Yes, I agree. Mm-hmm.
What about your story resonates with you the most?
Gosh, the part I think that resonates with me the most, um, I think what it is that looking from the outside in, you would have no idea the kind of journey that we found ourselves on and the adversity that we had to overcome. I talk a lot about like living in the suburbs and looking around at all my neighbors and being like, they have no idea, what we're struggling with, or how what we were really going through at the time. And I think what it really resonates with me is you never know what somebody else is really going
Mhm.
through, what their experiencing is, because we're kind of taught to keep that to ourselves, right? Like, oh, nobody wants to hear your baggage. People don't want to know. But realistically, I think in sharing our struggles, we can realize that there's actually a lot more people out there that can relate to us, and you don't feel so isolated and alone. So I think what resonates with me is just the fact of you never know what battle somebody's going through and that they're not sharing with you. And something that might seem really insignificant to some is really big to others, and that we have to really honor other people's lived experiences, even if we think, well, that wouldn't affect me in that way. It's just saying, well, that's their experience, and kind of allowing them to really have that space.
Well, that is so true because, when we go through our own experiences, like for instance, I'm slightly older than you. Well, let's be real, I'm a lot older than you. But, obviously my experiences now may or may not
Mhm.
pertain to you, or may not resonate with you in such a way as it would if maybe you were a little older. So I think we have to kind of sometimes take a step back
Yes.
and look at people's story in a way where their reflection comes from, how that impacted them, and what they want to achieve by that.
Yes, absolutely.
What would you say is something, perhaps a goal, an achievement, something that you want that's maybe on that big goal list?
Oh, goodness. The big goal list, I think, goodness, I really think for me, this is kind of just where I'm at in my own journey of life, is when I wrote this book probably about 2 months before it was published and out there, I had this moment where I started like just crying, and I was like, it was very, that's what I'm looking for. It was difficult and challenging, and I felt very vulnerable, because I was like, oh, the whole world can read this. And professionally, for my full-time job, I work in human resources. So sometimes we have to wear kind of a mask, or, you don't let people in. And all of a sudden I was like, oh gosh, the whole world can read my innermost feelings and my experiences and the challenges I've had. And so my big goal actually over the last few months was to just be very authentically who I am, and not feel like I have to wear kind of that, like, front that nobody gets to know the real me. And so my biggest goal is not necessarily one that would be like an achievement where I'd walk across the stage, or I'd, be able to check a box, but it's just being authentically who I am. And writing this book where we kept it silent for so long, our struggle, it's almost forced me to say, no, you put it out there, so now you have to really embrace it. And so I think that's like my big goal, is really just to be authentically who I am all the time. And that means that some people aren't going to love me, or they may not even like me, but that's okay. And just to be as authentic as I can, because I think that is what people are drawn to.
They certainly are. And I really want to point out that when you were talking about, connecting with who you are authentically are, and, embracement, like in that moment, Doreen, you own that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Like that, you just exuded the confidence,
Thank
and
you.
you owned, you're very welcome. And I think the masking part, I think a lot of times we put on these masks, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I feel so strong, or, I've often shared, of course, the story, my son's journey, and I've been very open and honest about that. And I think what we take away from other people's stories are the resiliency to honor their journey.
Yes.
And you certainly have done that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, obviously, there's a special someone in your life, and you mentioned your husband, of course. Is it okay if I say his
Yes.
name?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Saul. And he obviously was a big part of that book, and he really shared your heart and depth of the journey of your courtship, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that different different courtships, relationships, they have their ups and downs.
Yes.
And, as with any relationship, but you really shared it very openly and honestly. After you wrote your book, and perhaps when you sent it off, or when you uploaded it,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the process was for you, and then you're holding the book in your hands,
Mm-hmm.
what did that feel like for you?
Yeah, it was a really emotional moment. It was really funny because the project manager I worked with that helped me get the book out, she said, hey, I want you to do me a favor. And when you get the book, I want you to record the first time you actually hold it in your hands and you see it. And I would have never even thought twice about doing that. So I was really glad she gave me that heads up to say, you know, it can be a really emotional moment. And it was so funny because it was like, I knew I needed to record a video. It was supposed to be for part of my marketing. And I, when we opened it, my husband was recording the video, and it was my daughter and my teenage daughter. And when I opened it, I had just this overwhelming emotion, and I saw my name, and I actually wrote my book with my maiden name. And just kind of an interesting takeaway is my husband insisted I write it in my maiden name. He said that he wanted it to really be reflective of me as a person, and it was really weird because I saw my name and I was like, that's me. Like, that's the little girl that had this dream for all those years that one day she was going to write a book. And I looked at my daughter, I said, that says Doreen, that's me. And I just became overwhelmed and I started crying. And, we did we really were thoughtful in our book cover. We kind of went back and forth a couple of times with the person that helped me design it, because it was really important to me that it was reflective of the story, and it wasn't some, like, they had done some like kind of cheesy romance novel like covers, and I was like, no, I don't want it to be that. And so when I got it, it was just such a very moving moment. And my husband was just like, and when at my book release party, he had said, hey, I don't even think you should expect 50 people. Like, there's not going to be a lot of people. Just maintain your expectations. And over 100 people showed up, and he was just like, he was like, I should have known. He's like, when you put your mind to it, you do it. And so it was a really neat opportunity for us to connect in a different way, because he even said, there's nobody else he would ever have trusted to tell his story. So he was very grateful that I did. So it brought us together in a very special way, I think. It was scary at times, but very special. Mm-hmm.
Sure. What do you think about your husband's story? I mean, there's so many. I mean, I could think of a dozen, if not more, different points, but what do you think stands out for your husband? Because obviously I know he's part of the book.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's your story, but it's also his story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really funny because I had him read. So funny, because when I first said, I was like, hey, I'm going to write a book about this. And it was when we were in the thick of it. And it was kind of, again, my way of just every day I'd write, because it would be my outlet. And he's kind of like, oh, it'll just die on a hard drive somewhere. She will never follow through. And then I said, hey, I'm done with the manuscript. I need you to read it before I send it off for editing, in case there's something that I'm, doing it wrong. I'm portraying something wrong, or I want your approval. And he read it, and he came to me and said, I didn't realize how much you listened to me. I couldn't believe there were things you captured that I didn't even think twice about. And so it was just really funny that that was his takeaway, was like, you actually listened to me. But I think, for him, I think the part of it was just the way I told it. I think he said, I could have never told it in the way that you did, that gets people bought into it. He said, we joke because he's very dry sense of humor. He's like, I could have never told it in a way that got people to fall. I told him, I said, I want people to fall in love with you before they ever really knew what our struggle was. So they wanted us to win, and he always says that it was the way in which I told it that he was not expecting. He didn't know. He knew I wanted to write it, but I don't think he expected me to start when we were 13 years old.
And that's what really, which is very touching about your story, because as I started to read the book, of course I was making notes, and I'm like, oh my God, are they ever going to get together? And, and that's the beauty of that story. And I want to go back for a moment to your daughter. You mentioned your daughter was there when you opened up your book, and your husband is filming you. What was your daughter's reaction to her mom being an author?
Oh gosh, she was so happy. She's laughing in the video and smiling and excited with me. But what's really funny is in that moment she was so excited, but it's really funny because even now all of her friends know me as the author, which is so funny because she's like, she's like, I didn't even think about that, but you did write a book, you know? And so I'm mom to her, but she is so proud of it. And she really likes to she has a book signed by me. That's a very like personalized, like I wrote something very sweet. And then she has one that she like carries with her. And when she feels, I think, that need to connect with me, she reads it, because she's now at the age, right around the age when I met Saul. And so she likes to read that section because she thinks it's really funny to see, oh, that's what mom was like when she was my age. And so she really enjoys it. And she's so proud. She gets so excited. She tells everybody she can that I wrote a book.
Oh, that is so sweet. Does your daughter want to write a book?
She does. That's actually one of our plans one day, is that when I gave her the example of the gentleman I saw speak a decade ago, how he wrote a kid's book and an adult book, and that's what she wants to do. She wants to write one for kids that can give them excitement around adversity and overcoming things, and then she wants to write one for adults that's going to be more just realistically her story, but that's what she wants to do.
That is so beautiful. And, I see that happening for her. So that's exciting as well. And she needs to start writing it, and then we can have her in the podcast for sure. What is in store for you? In other words, now you have your book out. Excuse me. I foresee you doing maybe a workshop or a virtual get together with maybe other women sharing their stories. What is in store for Doreen?
Yes, I'm still trying to figure that out. It's been a really reflective year for me. The last year after the book came out, it was a complete whirlwind. But I realized how much life it gave me and how much vibrancy it made me feel. And so it's actually currently my journey. It was like I actually took a step back from my professional life. I still work my full-time job, but I took a step down and said, that's actually not what fuels my fire. My other work does, whether it's working with, I really like to work with young women, like young girls, because I was that young girl that had some really great mentors that helped me along. So I'm on a board for a school, and so I think my next step is really honing in on that and where I can bring value to that, because so whether it's like you said workshops or speaking engagements, that's where I'm on that journey of transparency and finding my genuine self. And so I tell Saul, though, I said, hey, like, you got to start co-facilitating with me. I said, because people want to meet you. I get that all the time. People are like, can I see a picture of your husband after they read my book? Because I describe him so often. They're like, what does he look like? And so I tell him at one point, I'm going to drag him into it, and I'm going to make him join me on some of those things. But I think it'll be a lot more interaction with my community, whatever that might look like.
Wow, that is so amazing. And when you go through a journey together, when you share your husband's story and the different transitions that each of you went through, there's so much value and there's so much depth that you are where you are today with your husband Saul. And obviously I would love to meet him at some point. Who knows, you will be one of those speakers, of course, at one of those engagements. There will be people out in the audience who connect with your story because you connected and you shared those stories. Like that to me gives me the chills. And I think it's so fascinating that in the world we live in today, that we can share our stories and inspire others to do the same.
I agree. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Doreen, where can our viewers and listeners connect with you further?
So they can connect with me depending on kind of what platform they prefer. I am on pretty much all of them. I'm on TikTok, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, Facebook. It's Doreen Padilla, and sometimes you'll see the author if it's like on Instagram. I think it's Doreen Padilla author, and same for TikTok. But then you can find my author page on Facebook as well.
Okay, wonderful. And of course, I will make sure, excuse me, that all of that information is the show notes. Doreen, I think there's someone who's out there right now, whether they're listening live, whether they listen to this on iHeartRadio, wherever they listen to their podcasts too, on what is one message you would like to share with that person who wants to share their story, but maybe is like, I I don't know.
Yes.
What do you want to share with them?
Yeah, so what I want to share is one of the other things that really prompted me to write my book. My husband had never publicly told his story. He was, early 30s by this point and had never told his story publicly, because there's lots about it in the book as to why not. But I finally had pushing and saying, you got to tell it, you got to tell it. And he was kind of put in a position where he had to, well, he didn't have to, but he chose to. And he was kind of back up against a wall. And he was a middle school science teacher. And so he told his story to his students. He had to leave teaching. And so he was letting them know, hey, I'm not going to be your teacher next year, but I really loved getting to know you. And he told them why. And he said he got tears in his eyes, and he came home just heartbroken over it, because he loved teaching. And his student came up to him afterwards, and she said, Mr. Falcone, your story is my story. And she said, thank you. And at that moment, that little girl had someone that she could look up to and saw, look at all the wonderful things my teacher has done for me. And he was in the same circumstances as I am. And so it gave that representation to her. And so I think you never know who is going to, who that person could be. And so I think telling your story, if you even impact one life, it is so worth it.
Oh my gosh, so eloquently said, because you never know who might be listening. You never know who may resonate with your story.
Yes.
That is beautiful.
Thank
Doreen,
you.
I want to thank you're very welcome. I want to thank you for, taking the time today. I know that you're in the middle of your workday, and I'm so glad you shared not only your inspiring story, but I also want to say a huge thank you to your husband, Saul, for sharing his story.
Thank you.
Everyone, this book is a must read, as with all my guests that have been on. It's so inspiring to hear a story of resiliency. And I'm not going to give away too much about the book. We did chat about Doreen's book and Saul's story, along with Doreen's story. These are the stories that inspire us. My name is Janice Malillo, your host, inspired by this young lady, Doreen, and her husband, Saul. Thank you all so much. And remember, your story matters. You never know who may need to hear your story. Thank you for being with us today, and we shall see you again real soon. Bye for now.